The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents an interview with David Smalley on his recent debate with Frank Turek. So in addition to doing debates and talking about debates, I post reviews of my own debates to kind of take a look at what I did right, what I did wrong, what I think my opponent did right, what I think they did wrong. But I don't post reviews of other people's debates. I have plenty of friends who debate regularly, and I don't go out and grab their debates and post reviews of it. Not that I think there'd necessarily be something wrong with it. It's just that uh, I don't necessarily have the time to go through every debate, and I'm not the ultimate arbiter of everything that's right or wrong with a debate. I also would rather have a conversation with the people involved than about the people involved. So that said, I'm really happy to discuss someone else's debate with the person who was actually involved in debate. And by the way, it's a debate that I have not seen, which isn't even live yet. It'll be live probably within days of this review being posted. So I don't have any comment to begin with about the subject of the debate and what might have gone wrong and what might not have gone wrong. But hopefully through the course of this discussion, we'll get to some of those points. I wanted to talk to my friend, David Smalley, who's the host of Dogma Debate, who recently did a debate with Frank Turek on Justin Brierley's show. What's the name of the show, David?
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. That's right. I've been on there before. I think I did a debate. I can't remember the name of the guy. I'm so sorry. I've forgotten the name of the guy whose debate I did. So thanks for doing this, David. I appreciate it. How was this debate arranged? How were you contacted about doing this?
Yeah, it was really kind of last minute. About, I guess, 4 days before this happened, I got an email from Justin that said the subject line was possible interaction with Frank Turek, ? And he's like, hey, I'm going to be interviewing Frank about his book, Stealing from God. And I would like to know if you would like to come on and give an atheist perspective of Stealing from God. I was like, I've never heard of the book. I've never read the book. I know who Frank is, but we've never interacted. But sure, why not? And then he's like, by the way, it's going to be 3:00 in the UK. So Pacific Standard Time, since I'm in LA now, he's like, you're going to have to be up around, 6 or 7 in the morning. It's probably going to take place about 7:45. And so that's what had to happen. I had to get up at 7:45 in the morning to do a debate. For this.
I think I might have been tempted to say no just because I'm working odd hours, but I appreciate it because I've never actually interacted with Frank Turek at all. I think we may be having a debate upcoming. I'm not completely sure. I know I'm doing a debate with Mike Licona in February, and I know there's been discussion about doing a debate with Frank. I'm at least familiar with who he is, although I'm not all that familiar with his work. So he's got a new book out called Stealing from God, and they wanted to talk about this.
Right. And I had no idea. I'd never heard of the book. I didn't know anything about it. I knew, like you said, I knew who Frank was. And so originally I said, look, if it's going to be one of these things, like some of my TV interviews have gone on some of the major TV stations, DirecTV, something like that, you line up, you get in a studio or you set up something like we're in now, and you sit there for about 11 or 12 minutes. They bring you on a panel. They ask about 4 people, 1 question. You get about 30 seconds to say something. They move on to something else, give you about a minute to say something, and then they're off to commercial break and you're doing something else. You get about 90 seconds, maybe if you're lucky, 2 minutes of airtime to get your views out. And then they're off to another subject and a 9-minute commercial break. And so I just frankly said, look, if it's going to be one of those types of interviews, I'm going to pass. It's not worth reshifting my entire schedule around. But if I'm going to get to do a deep dive interaction with Frank about these issues, I would love to. Justin replied and said, you're going to have about an hour to go at it directly with Frank about these issues. And I was like, sign me up. So I took
Was there a format to the debate? Was this presented as you're going to do a debate with a format, or was this more just conversational?
It was told to me that it was going to be conversational. And then when we went on air, it was, hey, I'm going to do 25 minutes with each person, and then I'll give you guys some time to interact. And he ended up doing like 10 minutes with Frank and a few minutes with me, and then we got to interact. But I don't know. It was, I mean, I like Justin. I like his program. I'm honored that he asked me to come on. And I believe it's going to be live February 3rd, if I'm not mistaken, February 3rd. And then it's going to air on UK radio on February 4th, but it'll be out as a podcast on February 3rd. Anyone interested, just go Google Unbelievable Radio, and it'll come up. The link, I think, is Premier Christian Radio, and then there's a couple of slashes, and that'll take you directly to the Unbelievable Radio page. So I definitely want people to go there and listen to the whole thing.
And if there's a link available by the time this gets posted, probably won't be by the time I post this, because I'm probably going to post this in the next day or so. I've never had a problem with Justin either. I like Justin. I actually liked going to a show. I even liked the debate that I did where somebody was a bit of not particularly pleasant, to the point where he wrote some kind of like apology thing explaining why he didn't need to be pleasant to me. And I get that, because, emotions run high and not everybody has the same temperament when you're talking about issues that are important to individuals that help define who they are. Sometimes things are going to get heated. Sometimes you're not always going to be pleasant. I'm not always pleasant. I do what I can. So going into this, what did you do to prepare? I mean, he's got a new book out. Did you read the book?
I did. I went out. I went to Audible and I bought his audiobook. Didn't even have any credits available, man. I paid full price for it, and I listened to the entire audiobook. The funny part about this, and part of the reason I want to talk to you, is his opening. It's pretty standard stuff that we hear from apologists. He got to like chapter 2, I think it was called Reason and Logic, or something about how atheists must steal reason and logic from God in order to make our arguments and claims. And one of the first things he says in that chapter is, you can't know anything without God. If atheism is true, you can't know anything to be sure. All of the things you think are facts are not facts, and you can't be right about anything. And I just kind of rolled my eyes and skimmed that chapter, because I'm like, I've heard this before with Matt Smith. We've heard it before with Cy. We've heard it with a lot of people. And I was just going, I really want to go focus more on how he pulls out the cosmological argument. And so I was making notes as I was going. The only chapter I didn't make notes on was the one on you must have God in order to do anything reason or logic based. So I just skipped that chapter. I listened to it in bits and pieces, but I didn't make any notes. And then about 24 hours before we actually went on air, I got an email saying that the entire discussion is going to be focused on reason and logic. And so,
well, that's wonderful. I mean, hey, here's this guy's got a whole new book, and we're going to look at this one chapter.
Right. And so I just said, okay, that's fine. And I never had a chance to go back and listen to it in depth. I had so many other things going on. And so I feel like at times, some of my responses made me sound unprepared. And they even brought that up. I'm like, sounds like you're a little unprepared to deal with this. But at the same time, I get irritated with some of the questions, because I think the questions are nonsensical. So I kind of did that thing that some people get frustrated with me about, is to where I'll get asked some sort of deep philosophical question, and I sidestep the whole question and go, that's irrelevant to there being a God. And I just kind of bring it back to reality. Some people enjoy that and go, I'm so glad you didn't go down the rabbit hole. Other people, like when you get asked a question like that, you jump down the rabbit hole with them, beat them at their own game, and come out successful. And I envy you for that.
Sometimes that's the way it goes. Not always. I mean, there's a reason.
I think most of the people watching this video know that that's your thing. You can follow them down into their territory and still come out victorious. I tend to avoid going into the territory altogether, because every question sounds like a trap question, and I just go, wait. How does that get us any closer to a dead Jew coming back to life? And it kind of brings the room back to, oh yeah, there's something else he has to prove here. And so I felt that Frank and Justin maybe got a little frustrated with me. And I have a couple of very short audio clips later on that I want to play for you and let you sort of analyze and tell me what you think about it. So I don't know that I was unprepared. I feel like I used logic. I used some basic common sense, but I didn't really go down the rabbit holes. And so I kind of want your advice on whether or not I took the right approach, or if I could do something better in the future.
Yeah, sure. We can listen to those and kind of talk about this. On occasion, it just, when I'm doing this, when I'm doing debates, I try to make sure that I keep a focus on what the subject should be to avoid derailing. But then I also am fine with the significance and importance of philosophical questions and foundations of epistemology and stuff like that. But I think we'll find that entire discussion about you can't know anything if there's not a God is, you say it's secondary to whether or not this accounts, or we have a good reason to think that there's a Jew who was raised from the dead who is God incarnate. but that doesn't make it irrelevant. But the curious thing for me is that a lot of people using those arguments aren't arguing for some vague deistic notion that serves as a foundation for that. They are arguing, as you rightly point out, for, you know, the risen Christ who they have a personal relationship with, and somehow they think that this argument gets you there, when I don't think it does. Now, you mentioned that they might view you as unprepared. We know you went through the book and you took lots of notes, and they happen to want to discuss the chapter that you didn't really take notes on. What do you think? I guess, what do you perceive as things that you might have done really well or not so well over the course of this discussion with Turek?
I feel like the thing I did well was point out that he is taxing atheism with coming up with all these questions. I'm sorry, with all these answers. For example, he'll say, if atheism is true, then how can, and I'll go, whoa, 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 whoa. You keep saying if atheism is true. So like you said, they put up this sort of deistic argument of there may be something out there. There may be some first cause, some mysterious God of the gaps thing. Just fill in a God. And then instead of me going, and then he'll say, you as an atheist, you now must tell me if there's no God, how do immaterial things exist? How can we have a thought that we can't hold? How, is it methodological naturalism? Are you prepared to take a stance of ontological naturalism and tell me this and that? Are molecules, I start getting into these weird little crevices. And I just sort of step back and go, wait. Atheism's not responsible for answering those things. If you want to talk about evolution and origin of species, biology can talk about that, and you can argue with a biologist about that. If you want to challenge my morality and say that my worldview lacks morals, that's my humanism that provides that, not my atheism. So atheism doesn't address evolution and biology. Atheism doesn't address morals. Atheism just addressed the existence or non-existence of any proposed God. And I felt like that's what I did a good job of, because he says in order to be an atheist, you must steal from God to get all of these answers. And I think he's just misunderstanding atheism. It would be like me saying, hey, Chevrolet, it's up to you to tell me why, Toyota does this and this and this. And if you can't tell me why they operate that way, you're clearly the worst car on the planet. It's such a false dichotomy. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think I did a good job. I feel like I did a good job of pointing out that he's taxing atheism with more than it's responsible for answering to. And I feel like my weaknesses were probably, like I alluded to before, I do want to be able to provide some of those answers. I want to be able to say, well, here's my stance on it. And a lot of times my stance is, I don't know. And I'm okay with that to some degree, but I feel like I should have some form of answer of, here's how I think it happened. And here's the best evidence we have. And here's what, physicists tend to agree on, or something like that. So I wish I had a broader depth of knowledge when it comes to the standard atheist argument for these things. But a lot of times I feel like we don't have to, so I don't even let them pull me down that rabbit hole. But I would still like to be prepared if I do get trapped into something like that.
Not only do we not have to, so there's a couple things that took place from your description of that conversation. Number one, there were two different usages of the term atheism. Because if he says, if atheism is true, he must necessarily be talking about strong atheism, the position that asserts that there are no gods. And so what he's really saying, because atheism is about what you believe or don't believe. I don't believe that there's a God. But what he's really saying when he says, if atheism were true, we should rephrase that as, if there is no God. Now that is a matter of fact. And then whether you accept that there's a God or do not accept that there's a God, that is where we get into the belief labels of theism and atheism.
Yeah. So Frank is under the impression, and his whole book is predicated on this idea that atheism stands firm on, I know there is no God, there is nothing immaterial, there is nothing metaphysical, no ghosts, no spirits, no other realm. And that's just not the case. I know tons of atheists who feel like they've had spiritual interactions. I've got I have an email in my inbox right now of an atheist who believes he can control and request rainbows. This is an honest belief he has. He feels like he can request a rainbow to appear and it appears. So just because you answer the question, I don't believe a God exists, doesn't automatically mean you reject everything immaterial, everything metaphysical. There are
Yeah.
atheists I know that say that they visit their dead loved ones and the ghosts of their loved ones appear to them. And so I had to tell him this, and it seems like it was the first time he'd ever heard it. Like, atheism isn't automatically connected with rejection of everything immaterial. That would be more along the lines of skepticism. And once again, you've got evolution, you've got skepticism, you've got humanism. Frank takes atheism and puts all of those things under the umbrella of atheism and says atheism must account for all of these things. And I think that's a mischaracterization of atheism, and it's really building a straw man he can easily knock over.
Well, that's part of it, is this disagreement about the usage of the term atheism. But if we were to listen charitably and look at what he's actually saying, his argument then becomes, if in fact there is no God, what then is your explanation for insert thing here?
Right.
There's a couple of problems here. The first is, if David Smalley doesn't have an explanation for it, that's irrelevant. If Matt Dillahunty doesn't have an explanation for it, that's irrelevant. If no one on the planet has an explanation for whatever he's trying to explain, that is irrelevant as to whether or not there is a God. So he's actually confusing the state of affairs even further. The issue should be, what is the explanation for insert your thing here? Logic, thoughts, the metaphysical, whatever. Please, what is the explanation for these? And the theists who believe that there's a God think that God is a both necessary and sufficient explanation for these things. And because of that, when they consider the hypothetical that there is no God, they are then convinced that there can be no explanation. If there's no God, you can offer me no explanation for this. Now, they could be right that if there is no God, then there is no explanation for this, or at least no explanation that we can understand, because it may not be, a causal type thing. And they could still be wrong about whether or not there's a God. So when he puts forward this idea, there's several things happening. One, he's confusing whether or not someone believes there's a God with whether or not there is a God, or actually not confusing. He's conflating those two as if they're identical. And then he's saying, if you say, I don't know, or you don't have if your answer to my question is, I don't know, or you don't have an explanation, then my explanation wins by default, which is another fallacy. His explanation doesn't win by default. He actually has to demonstrate not just that a God could account for this, but that there is a God who does account for this. And because then he's just appealing to consequences. Hey, if there's no God, then we have no explanation, or we have no grounding for an absolute incontrovertible morality. But we have an incontrovertible morality, therefore God. Please demonstrate that we have the type of incontrovertible morality or absolute morality that you're talking about in order to justify the God. So there's a parade of fallacies here. There's an equivocation about the atheist label. There's confusion or conflation of atheism with philosophical naturalism, and not only that, but strong philosophical naturalism. And then there is an argument, an appeal to consequences. If there is no God, then this is the case. And they're trying to say this isn't the case. And that's where they'll get you to say things like, well, what's your view on morality? Is it absolute? How can you have a foundation? So they're trying to show that somehow David is in conflict, or Matt is in conflict, or Arn is in conflict, or whoever they're talking to. And that demonstrates the futility of the non-theistic position, because they're not willing to accept an I don't know answer, because they're convinced that they already have an answer.
He admitted, when I called that argument out and said, you're just giving a generic deistic argument. In fact, I said Muslims can use the exact same argument against you and say, yeah, you can pretend to have your belief in God, but you're just borrowing from Allah, praise be to Allah, Allah Akbar, because you're using actual knowledge given to you by Allah, the one great and powerful God, and you're abusing that to worship this false idol, Jesus Christ. And how do you argue that when they're using the exact same thing you're saying to me to say that your God is false and you really get all your knowledge from Allah? And he acknowledged that. He was like, yeah, you're right. I'm not arguing for the God of Christianity right now. I'm just saying atheism absolutely must be false if there is no deity out there, because atheism makes all of these specific claims.
I think you might have it backwards.
For you to say anything logical, you're stealing from God, and that's where he got the title of his book.
Okay, so that brings us to, I guess, the crux of it, because I like your way of exposing that he's arguing for a generic deistic God, and if he accepts that that's what he's actually arguing for, okay, then you get to move on at that point. The problem is that he hasn't actually demonstrated that there's a God. What he has demonstrated is that he can pose a question which an individual atheist may not have an explanation for, and which may not be explicable if in fact there is no God. But he's assuming that there must be an explanation, and therefore there must be a God, when that's not necessarily the case. When you ask, why is there something rather than nothing? Well, a non-theistic worldview doesn't have an answer for that, and may never have an answer, which, by the way, this is another problem with this, is this arrogance of assuming that because we don't have an answer now, that we can't ever have an answer, in a non-theistic worldview.
Okay, so let me play Jesus advocate for a second.
Should I put horns on?
Yeah. From their perspective, this is how we appear to them. We appear to say, your God isn't real. The Muslim God isn't real. But I'm not prepared to answer any questions about how I know anything about the universe. Well, where did life come from? I don't know. Where did the laws of logic come from? I don't know. Humans thought of it. Okay, where did, all these things come from? What was the first life? What was the first cause of the universe? Why do we have matter? Why is there something rather than nothing? And the atheist is going, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And then you get to the end and go, but I do know your God's not real. And so we look ridiculous to them because we don't have any real solid answers. We just say, I don't know, but I hope to know in the future. Yet we have the audacity to reject their God. And so they find that
reject their God without saying, I know it's not real. I don't know that any particular God is not real unless it's, internally contradictory.
But that's how we look to them. We look, it's almost.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's how we
look at it, as intellectual laziness, that we don't have to know the answers to any of these major questions. And we get tripped up on, well, is it a worldview? Is it not a worldview? Is humanism the worldview, or is atheism the worldview? I go back and forth. I
think my response to
what's that?
I think my response to this almost every single time is, yes, in fact, I'd love to know the answers to those questions. I just prefer the right answers rather than accepting answers that haven't met their burden of proof. And so my answer for now is, I don't know why there's something rather than nothing. You're convinced, Frank, or whoever you're talking to, that you understand why there's something instead of nothing. You're convinced that you have the explanations for this, and yet they cannot demonstrate that their explanation is real, that it's true. And until they do, I cannot possibly accept it, and I'm stuck in the uncomfortable position of acknowledging that I don't know and I don't have an explanation. But the one thing that I'm cautious not to do is to say, I know, or definitely never say I'm certain that your God doesn't exist. I might say no in a colloquial sense, because that's just, an expression of confidence for a particular God. So what they hear us saying is, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, but I know you're wrong. And what we're actually saying is, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. You claim to know, yet you can't demonstrate it in a convincing way that doesn't include logical fallacies or appeals to, special ways of knowing. And so until that happens, I'm not going to change my mind. That's what's really going on.
I love that answer. This is why I talk to you, Matt. This is why that answer, I think I'm going to carry with me and use that moving forward.
So you had some audio clips from this that you kind of wanted to go over, and I figured we could maybe listen to that and talk about it some more. And I wanted to mention, David and I have been friends for years. And by the way, it's worth noting, even though it has nothing to do with this conversation, David and I don't agree on everything, and yet we're still friends. So keep that in mind. As a matter of fact, there may be even something that we vehemently disagree on. I don't know for sure. I know we are at odds on some things. I would like to see, more people who disagree. How is it I can have debates and be friends with people like Blake? I'm friends with Blake. He sat right here on the couch behind me for 3 hours to do 2 separate videos, and we still left friends. And we are in vicious disagreement on, you know, the supernatural and how to go about demonstrating the supernatural, at least as far as gods are concerned.
I think
Um,
I think one day we'll have to do another video about this, because I think the mistake I make in those interactions is this is going to sound really bad. I don't know how else to word it, but I think if you meet a stranger and a stranger almost bumps into you and you're like, oh, I'm sorry. And they go, oh, I'm sorry. You're both really, really nice to each other. But if your brother bumps into you in the hallway, you're like, move, because you're more of a family, and you kind of expect more out of that person. You're more comfortable with that person. You feel like that person in your family knows your heart more than the stranger would know. So it's a little different. I'm guilty of assuming that atheists and skeptics are going to be always rational and not be emotional. And
or that they know you well enough to see through what they may see as a conflict.
And I need to realize too that emotion is a human condition, not a religious condition. And atheists I still need to address the emotion even when I'm talking with atheists, and that's something that I've learned recently through these types of interactions. But I think that's another video for another time.
Yeah, that's a completely separate topic. I just mentioned this because before you did your debate with Matt Slick, you and I had a number of conversations. We, bounced thoughts off each other, and I tried to answer questions. And I think it was helpful to both of us because we did our two debates that weekend. So I appreciated this. And like I mentioned in the introduction, I'm not going to go out and do reviews. It's like if you do a debate, I'm not going to go line by line through it and go, oh my gosh, David screwed up here and his opponent really screwed up here and he didn't capitalize and this is an awesome answer, because it's not all about me. Although I realize, this Atheist Debates Project is mine and people are tuning in to get my thoughts. But the thing I said from the beginning was I wanted to get thoughts from other people as well. And before we get to your audio clips, I wanted to talk about two quick things. I wanted to talk about your perceptions of Frank Turek as an individual, or as he carried himself in this debate, and the arguments that he presented, what your thoughts were with regard to whether they were may have been stronger or weaker than others you've heard. I guess we're kind of doing a how cool or uncool is Frank and where does he fit on the apologist scale. But I really wanted to just get your thoughts on your gut feel on him and his arguments after having been in this discussion.
I think Frank he's absolutely a professional apologist, no doubt. He is he knows his stuff, at least what he feels like he's supposed to know, meaning in Christian camps, he's going to be one of the toughest debates anyone can have, because he takes these Lee Strobel and William Lane Craig style of arguments, but he's also a radio host. He's also quick on his feet. He stops and lets you talk if you begin talking. He gets that dialogue, so he's great to have on the show. I've invited him now on the Dogma Debate. Talking with other radio people or other people in broadcast, their answers are like 40 seconds and then they stop when you begin talking. People who aren't into radio would just keep kind of muddling the conversation and interrupting, and they don't really get the broadcast aspect.
That's why I'm not on radio.
but they, he gets it. And his arguments, I saw someone on Twitter say this too, and I don't mean any disrespect to Frank. I just disagree with him. He's really good at sounding like he's answering the question, when in fact he says things that I just addressed. Like, for example, at one point he said on his own that I said I didn't have a worldview, and I never said that. And then at one point I said, after he said that, I said, well, I've said before that I had a worldview, that atheism is my worldview. And then again, I've sort of caught myself going, I don't think atheism is my worldview because it doesn't encompass all of them, but it is a way I view the world, that there is no God. But I don't know that it is my worldview. I would be more apt to say humanism is my worldview and atheism is my opinion, or my, when I look at the evidence, I don't believe in any gods. And then just 10 minutes later, he again said, David asserts that he has no worldview.
And see, that's a problem, because you didn't say you didn't have any worldview. You just said atheism isn't it. And I'm in agreement with that, by the way. When I talk about what is a worldview, it is a package of your notions that inform how you look at the world.
Yeah.
And atheism, being a single position on a single issue, certainly informs my view of the world, but it is not my worldview in its entirety. And neither is skepticism and neither is humanism. But I would imagine that a package of those would come really close to what I would say is a skeptical, atheistic, secular, humanist worldview, uh, because these are the things that are both conclusions of what I've experienced in the world, but they also inform me about how to look at the world.
Yep. I'm right on. I said in the debate that humanism is my worldview, that I'd be more comfortable calling that my worldview. But back to your question about how Frank did, he's good. He's a master at asking trap questions. And you will sometimes walk in the trap, let it close on you, and then eat the monster from the belly out. And that's awesome to watch. I don't know that I trust myself to do that as well as you do. So I just avoid the trap and sort of jog around it, challenging why he's asking the question he's asking.
This is what
What's that?
I don't think there's any such thing as a trap. Well, all right. I'm not afraid of trap questions. I don't think there is a trap or a trick question. I think that questions can be phrased in such a way that they're seeking a particular answer. And what I tend to do is give an honest answer that, sometimes their trap or their trick is to try to get you to acknowledge that you don't know. And as long as you're comfortable saying, I don't know, then there's no way to be trapped.
Well,
And as long as you're being honest about what you think and what you don't think, you could be shown to be wrong, but that still doesn't necessarily show that they're right.
bingo. And I did that a lot. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't have to know in order to say I don't believe in your God. And that still makes me an atheist, that I don't have to steal anything from your God to say I don't know. That was the basis of my position in the debate. But there are trap questions like, is there balance in the universe?
Yes, there is balance in the universe. That doesn't mean that the universe is itself totally balanced with respect to anything that you might be alluding to. But balance is both a word and a concept. And, to me, that's the key, is to expose that the question that they've asked is potentially an equivocation, that they're asking something with a particular concept in mind, but that concept is not clearly contained in what they actually addressed. And so in that case, this is where I've talked before about how my brain works. I've worked software QA for years. I've been a magician since I was 3. There's something incredibly analytical and deconstructive about my brain. It's going to pick things apart. And it's very, very easy for me to just be hyper literal. And so when there's a question that appears to be sloppily phrased, I will be hyper literal with that. I will just go, yep, there is balance in the universe. That doesn't mean that the universe is balanced.
Okay. So I'm going to play this first clip. I've only got 2, and I want to be clear. I don't have permission from Justin of Unbelievable to expose this, but the way I look at it is this whole show is over an hour long, and I've got a 47-second clip and another clip that's a minute 22 seconds. I feel like if anything, it'll drive more people to listen to the debate, not take from him. So I'm
sure there's going to be a lot more context. And right before you play that, this comes up a lot. Do you feel that the two of you were just talking past each other, or do you feel that there was ever a moment in this entire discussion where you were actually talking about the same thing at the same time with some sort of connection? Because I've been in conversations where there appeared to never be a connection. I've been in conversations like Blake and I will have connection on some very significant things, and then we part ways. So how much of this was you guys just talking past each other?
I'm afraid, and I want to know your opinion when you actually hear the full debate. I'm afraid that the majority of it is going to sound like we're talking past each other. But there were some very poignant moments of clarity where we came to the same page and he admitted, yeah, you're right. That's not what I'm trying to do here. And very clear points where I would say you're taxing atheism with something atheism hasn't made a claim for. And then he would sort of stumble over it and try to reword the question, but it was clear he was falling back into the same fallacy. And I just wouldn't answer the question because I would point out the way he's answering the question is fallacious, or asking the question is fallacious. And so there were times where we were clear, and then there were times where we weren't even speaking the same language. So I think both happened in this discussion.
Although I'd be careful about calling a question fallacious, because technically speaking, fallacies occur in arguments. So, but you could make an argument with kind of like a rhetorical question. But
Well,
I will let you get to play
what
this.
I mean, well, what he always does in his questions is he throws out a concept and then asks a question based on that fallacious concept.
Right.
And
There's an implied argument.
I'm going to show you what one that I think he did that with this audio. But before I do, I want to say, please Google Unbelievable Radio. It's actually Premier Christian Radio. I want to point people to Justin's show. I don't want to take away from it. And these clips are just very, very short clips. I'm considering probably under fair use, us discussing it and playing little clips of it. So I hope Justin isn't upset with me for doing this. I'm taking a chance here.
If so, I will just, cut them out of the video at some point if necessary. But I don't think that's a problem. We're all interested in discussing this, as is Justin and Frank, I know.
Right, of course. So I want to start with this one. Like I said, I've only got two. I want you to, Matt, I would like you to listen to this clip. It's only 47 seconds. Listen to Frank's question. Think about what your own answer would be. Listen to my answer and tell me if you think my answer was decent, good, if I could have answered it better, and what your answer would have been. So here we go.
The question I'd like to ask David and just see how he responds is, David, is this: if your brain evolved by an unguided, unintelligent process, and all your thoughts are completely dictated by the laws of physics, in other words, you're just a moist robot, then why should we think your thoughts are true, including your thoughts that atheism are true?
Again, the comment that atheism is true asserts that atheism is making a positive claim. So I'm not really sure what you're asking when you say that I need to tell you something that makes you believe atheism is true. I think you're misunderstanding atheism by asking the question that way. I'll give you a chance to reword it because maybe I misunderstood. All right. What do you think?
Okay. So I understand what your confusion is. The question that he's asked is the same thing that Matt Slick repeatedly asked of me, that others have as well. It's not so much that you focused on his final portion of that, which is why atheism is true, which really shouldn't have been included in the question. But his question was, if your brain evolved through an unguided natural process and you're just a moist robot, well, okay, I don't know what the hell moist robot even means.
I love that. I love that, by the way.
I think I do, but I like the phrasing. There seems to be a hidden assumption there that a moist robot could not be correct. I mean, for example, a computer is not a person yet, and yet it could have correct information. So the argument is, if your brain evolved unguided, why is it that we should think any of your thoughts are in fact true? And the answer to that, as far as I'm concerned, is that if we define truth as that which is consistent with reality, then my thoughts can be examined with respect to reality. If in fact we have access to reality, whether we're robots or moist robots or whatever, and in reality this pen exists, and my thought is this pen exists, it is the independent examination of reality and comparison of what we find in reality to what I think about reality that tells me whether or not my thoughts are true.
What he's going to say to that is, but you're using those same moist robot chemicals in your brain to tell you that,
yes,
that what reality is actually true. So how do you know your reality is even real? Now we're jumping into brain in a vat type situations.
Yes.
Run screaming from.
And the answer is, I'm aware of no solution to hard solipsism. Let's say Frank was right about God and I was wrong about God. How do I know that? How can I investigate that? If I am stuck, I'm in this world as far as I experience a world is a better way to say it. I experience a reality, and until somebody shows me a way to experience something other than this reality, I'm stuck. And so I have two choices: either I deny reality, or I work within the reality I experience. And we know what happens, or I'm at least aware of what happens, or what would potentially happen if I stopped, working within reality. If all of a sudden I thought I could walk out in the street and the truck would just go through me, I'm convinced that I would die. Can I demonstrate that without dying? No. I mean, you can come up with puzzles like this. There's a reason why these questions, the issue of hard solipsism, is viewed by philosophers as unsolved and potentially unsolvable. And so if he first asks, if you're a moist robot, why should we think anything that you believe is true? Okay, he's not appealing to the reality I experience, which is what I am. He's saying, how do you know the reality you experience is the really, really real reality? And the answer is, I have no way of knowing that. All I know is that I experience this reality. And apparently, I'm convinced that you're experiencing it along with me.
But
if you think there's another reality, then there's becomes a burden of proof to demonstrate that there's a really real reality beyond what I know.
Right. The demonstration, I think, is what he was challenging. Why should I believe an atheist who doesn't even acknowledge God, which is where we get logic and reason from, and your brain, you believe your brain is just chemicals and you're a moist robot, you're just a product of things forcing you. Almost a Sam Harris way of viewing it rather than Dennett, which I think you and I are both leaning a little more toward the Dennett view of on free will, and I know that's a touchy subject.
Well, one of the things about this is that we're not asking him to believe an atheist. I'm not saying that he should believe me. I'm saying that you are stuck dealing with whatever reality you experience.
I did mention that, by the way. I did say that's all we have to go on at some point in the debate. And I think shortly after that, I said that's all we have to use to judge is our senses and our reality. I think I did bring that up, but not of course, not as eloquently as you put it. But his challenge is, how do you know your thoughts are real if you're just chemicals and a product of matter in the universe?
Yeah. What do you mean by real? That's my first question. I experience a reality. Whether or not there's a really real reality beyond it, whether or not I'm correct about my reality is irrelevant. I'm stuck dealing with the reality that I experience until somebody shows me how to experience a different reality. Now, if in fact we're in agreement, Frank and I, that we're sharing the same reality, then we can have a discussion about the reality we experience. And the curious thing is this: Frank and I could probably have a discussion about every single aspect of reality and come to agreement about the facts of reality, with the exception of the extra things that he believes about reality that he cannot demonstrate. And Occam's razor cuts those out, and I win.
Okay, gotcha. This other one, I've heard other people mention it before, but I've never been asked the question directly in a debate. So I didn't know as he was asking the question how I was going to answer it. My brain popped on with this answer in my radio mode, and I have no clue if this is, in your opinion, going to be the worst answer I could have possibly given, if you're going to agree with him and his assertion and tell me that I'm wrong, which please do if that's your position, or if this is a solid answer. And again, the reason I want to do this with you on video and the reason I'm putting myself out there as potentially making these mistakes is because I want people to learn from them and watch this video and say, wow, this guy's writing books and he hosts a radio show, and Matt Slick is out there doing radio shows. These guys are saying stuff to Christian listeners. Those Christian listeners are talking to atheists and their family. So when people get challenged with this kind of stuff, I want to help them be able to respond adequately. This is how I responded when I was put on the spot to something that I thought was a really strange question. I know you've dealt with it before. I've just never come across it. So I want to play this for you, and I want you to hear how I responded.
You said that the laws of logic, and if I'm taking words out of your mouth the wrong way, correct me. You're saying that these are human conceptions, that we conceive of these laws. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, if they're just human conceptions, let me ask you this. Before there were any human minds on Earth, was the statement, there are no human minds on Earth, true?
Frank, that it's just a nonsensical question. There couldn't be a question before human minds were on Earth.
No, I'm not talking about the order of being or the order of knowing here. I'm talking about the order of being again. I'm talking about
right, but we have to know. But we have to understand
propositionally.
But we have to understand the order of knowing before we can talk about the order of being. It does.
So rather than run through that whole minute and 20-second clip, if you'll allow me, Frank's right.
Okay.
Or at least I'll say I'm in agreement with what Frank is saying at the outset, because he started by saying, he asked you if you thought that the laws of logic, and by that, there's no such thing as the laws of logic, by the way. This is phrasing that, as far as I can tell, Matt Slick came up with. These were identified as the laws of thought by Bertrand Russell and others. Okay. And they are identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. And so he asked you if you said these are human conceptions, and you said yes. And the problem here is that these things are apparently true in all circumstances, including even when there are no minds. It's just that there would be nobody there to recognize that these were true. It's kind of like if every human mind that exists now ceased to exist, there's no reason to think that anything else would change. This cup would still be a cup. And more strongly than the physical things, the laws of logic, which I'll just use that phrasing for now, are true even if there's no reality, even if there's nothing, because nothing is still nothing.
Well, what had happened right before this was he said, if you don't believe in God, where do we get laws of logic and our thought processes? And I said something along the lines of, it was discovered and developed with human minds. We came up with how our logic works in this universe. And
so you're talking about something different than he is, I think, is what the problem is. He's talking about the foundations of thought, which, as far as I'm concerned, are discoverable truths about reality. They are the way they are.
Discovered, not invented. I think I said developed by human minds, and I probably should have said discovered by human minds.
Well, he asked you if they were conceptions, and that's the mistake, is saying that they are mere conceptions, because a conception by definition is something that it exists only in the mind.
Okay.
You know, there is a world, and I have a concept about the world, and when my concept goes away, the world remains, or apparently remains.
Yeah.
But when he was asking, before anyone existed to have a concept of the laws of logic, were they still true? And the answer to that, as far as I can tell, is yes. Because, as he was pointing out, you could make a true statement. No one exists who can understand logic. That statement, even though there's nobody to make it and nobody to assess it, this is why it's a thought experiment. It's like, imagine an empty room and look around the empty room, and then you say, oh, well, I can't look around an empty room because then it's not empty. That's not the point. The thought experiment is to assess the facts about the room that is empty. And so if you want to do a hypothetical to say there are no minds, there are no, everything else in the universe is the same, but there are no minds, like no life has evolved yet. The laws of logic must still be true because they are foundational to anything else working.
But they're objective.
Yeah, a thing is what it is,
so
irrespective of whether anybody knows it. And that's the first law, identity.
So then his next challenge is obviously going to be, if you believe that the laws of logic and thought, this concept of laws of logic can exist when no human minds are present, that's
a concept existing. That's the problem. It's not a concept that exists.
It's the laws that exist. They're
not laws. See, this is why the actual labeling of them as laws is problematic. Because we view, first of all, they're not prescriptive, they're descriptive. They just describe the facts about reality. And as far as we can tell, nothing could ever violate this, because we have no reason to think that anything that could be both what it is and not what it is at the same time in the same way. And in order to show that these things were somehow false, you would have to assume them to be true in order to use them to reason that they were false. And that leads to a contradiction. And this is why this foundation is where I have to stop. And I say that the identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are presuppositions that seem to be absolute, which I am perfectly within my rights as a reasonable person to acknowledge that these things appear to be true until such time as somebody can demonstrate any way they could be false, because we know that they are true right now. And to argue that they could have been some other way at any point in time, or even in the absence of time, would require you to assume that they were true.
So then
logical. What's that?
If logic exists, if logic can exist,
that's a problem too.
With no human minds on Earth, if the statement is still true that logic exists, or that cup exists and these things are true with no human minds existing on Earth, the next follow-up question is, then you're acknowledging something transcendent, something beyond human minds that must have created that logic?
So first of all, I don't think I don't use the language that these things exist. Exist has a specific connotation. A physical thing exists, and a concept exists in the sense that it is present as a brain state. So Matt Slick, anybody, by the way, when they argue these things, this is where Matt Slick gets the transcendental argument for the existence of God, that the laws of logic are not physical and not conceptual, and therefore they are transcendent. And I'm fine with that label, because that label does not mean that there is some transcendent lawgiver who created them. My position is that this is as far down the rabbit hole, this is as far as we can dig. The laws of logic are the bedrock. You can't go beyond that and say, well, why are the laws of logic? I mean, that is nonsensical. And you can't go beyond that to say, oh, they are that way because of God. That is also not, you just can't go any further. It's like when we're investigating the origins of the universe, we have no way to investigate beyond the Planck time. It's a little different from that because we have good reason to think that there was something at least before the Planck time, even though we can't assess time that way. But when it comes to reasoning, these are the foundations of reasoning that are self-evident. You might even call them properly basic, although that gets into weird philosophical territory. So I just say that they're presuppositions. I don't say that they exist. And I'm fine with somebody labeling them transcendent, because that does not, despite the assertion, mean that there's a transcendent lawgiver.
So be very concise here with this answer. Whenever you say, if no human minds exists, is the statement no human minds exist true? And you say, yes, truth can still exist without human minds.
Yes.
What do you call, is it a fact of reality that exists? If so, what created that fact of reality if no human minds are on the earth?
Nothing created the fact of reality, because fact of reality is just reality. Truth is that which comports to reality. Let's say every mind goes away and this pen remains. We'll just assume that that's the case. We have no reason to think otherwise. Then the statement, this pen is sitting on this desk, is true, even if there's nobody who knows about it, even if there's nobody who could possibly know about it. This is a fact about reality. That is independent from whether anybody knows or recognizes. Because, for example, let's say on Pluto, at a specific coordinate, 500 meters down is a diamond bigger than any diamond that exists on Earth. Let's assume for a second that that is the case. Then that is true. And it's true because it is a fact about reality. And reality is the explanation for why that's true. That's just the way things are. And that statement of fact is true, even though nobody knows it right now. And even if nobody ever knows it or ever could actually confirm it, it is still a fact. Truth is independent from whether or not we have access to the truth and whether or not we recognize that there's a truth. My wallet, you know, I might be the only one. As a matter of fact, I might not know how much money is in my wallet, but there is some amount of money in my wallet between zero, which is highly probable, and, you know, a couple $100, which is highly improbable based on past experience. But there's some amount of money in my wallet, including zero. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is, but it's still a fact. Okay. And our inability to recognize it or have access to it doesn't change whether or not it's a fact.
Okay, got it. That's beautiful. But then his follow-up is going to be, where does that fact come from? And let me play the rest of this clip, because push back on his reasoning to avoid the question. He changes the question up. So I kind of do the same thing again, and maybe I'm making a mistake. But listen to the rest of this clip.
Again, I'm talking about
right, but we have to know, but we have to understand
propositionally.
But we have to understand the order of knowing before we can talk about the order of being. It doesn't make sense for a question to exist before human minds existed to think of the question. It's putting the cart before the horse. It makes no sense.
No. All right, forget the thought. There are no human minds on Earth, right? And there's a rock on Earth. Was it true before there were any human minds on Earth that there was a rock on Earth?
Again, the concept of truth and lie and incorrect and correct and logic and reason happened within the human mind through evolution. So it doesn't make sense to ask the question before those minds exist. Okay, let me critique myself there first. I'm going back to the concept. He's talking about the fact of reality. So we're talking past each other. I'm correct in saying that the concept of truth can exist if the
So yes, what's happening?
our ability to acknowledge and recognize truth couldn't exist before minds existed, but truth on its own can exist even if minds aren't here to recognize it.
Yes, what happened here is that you guys are using two different definitions of truth. By truth, to him, truth is fact about reality, and I'm fine with that. What you meant by truth in that context was, in that sentence, something in your case, something is true if there is an accurate thought about a fact of reality. And so when he asks, "Is this true?" and you're sitting here thinking, well, that's nonsensical, because when I talk about truth, I'm talking about whether or not someone has an accurate thought about a fact of reality.
Right.
And he was talking about whether or not that fact of reality. And I understand both. And as long as you clear this up in the discussion, which I think he tried to do, because he said something along the lines of, remove the thought.
Yeah, and I didn't catch that part until just now.
And I think if the two of you talked about this again, and you said, okay, what I was thinking, the context in which I was thinking about truth is something is true if it is an accurate thought about reality. And he was saying something is true if it is a fact about reality. Mm-hmm. And that's why he went with a rock absent minds, just like I went with a diamond on Pluto that nobody knows about.
So what do you think his follow-up question would be if I were to say, yes, that statement is true? Is he going to say, where does truth come from? Are you admitting that truth is immaterial?
Well, now, I don't know enough about Frank.
I have to acknowledge now that now what he's wanting me to do is acknowledge that I do believe in something immaterial, as though a fact of reality is immaterial. Now, as an atheist, he's trying to get me to put one step into the metaphysical world. And I felt like that was the trap.
It's not a trap. Do you believe there are facts about reality?
Yeah. I feel comfortable. I feel comfortable saying that here because I feel safe with you, Matt.
Yeah. So that's the thing. That's one of the things. This is why I don't view these as trap questions or trick questions, because I'm fine with saying I believe in things. Now, you use the term metaphysical. I mean, there are people who will abuse that term, and you have to be ready for the equivocation fallacy every time, because the fact that I might accept one thing that is non-physical and non-conceptual, and therefore we could label it transcendent or metaphysical, whatever, doesn't mean I then believe other things are. And by the way, the things that I believe that are not physical and not conceptual, this presupposition about the laws of logic, I have a reason to believe that because they seem to be true. They continually prove themselves to be true and useful. They are demonstrable. And by the way, in the case of the laws of logic, we use them all the time. You could have no reason and no discussion, which is what they're wanting to get to. I don't know what his follow-up would be to that, because there was a disconnect on the label of truth. But I think if he asked, I think one of the probable questions is, how do you know that's the case? And that's what most people stick up or get stuck on. Because if you say, if there were no minds in the universe and everything else was the same, then is a rock still a rock? And you say yes. And if they ask, how do you know that? Then the answer is, because you just described the scenario in which everything else is necessarily the same, which means a rock is a rock, because that's true, irrespective of whether anybody knows it or anything else. You're talking about the facts of reality. And you, in his question, he defined the facts of reality in a way that they don't change. So it's not that much of a problem to say, I'm okay with the laws of logic, and stop there, because what they're doing, and we've discussed this before when we discussed, Matt Slick and other presuppositionalists, is they are saying they have an explanation for this, and they are saying no other worldview can offer an explanation. and they don't ever demonstrate either. They don't. There's no way for them to demonstrate that no other worldview can, because they'd have to know everything about all potential worldviews. But they could demonstrate that their worldview can offer an explanation for these things. They just don't ever do it. They just assert that this is the case, that, oh, there is a God who is necessary and sufficient to offer as an explanation for logic. And there's a bigger problem here. And that is, if you have a thinking agent who serves as your foundation for logic, then logic is no longer absolute, unless you say the character of God is such that, you know, he can't change or violate the laws of logic. And if you say that, if you say God is the explanation for logic, and we can be confident that God cannot change and cannot violate these, then what you've done is, with regard to the foundations of logic, you have just defined them as inviolable or inviolate, that they can't be violated. And the God becomes irrelevant. Their entire argument for the foundation. Logic needs a foundation so that it can be trusted. And then their entire foundation is, there is a being that will never change that serves as that trustworthy foundation. And what they've done is render that being irrelevant, because now it becomes just synonymous with the laws of logic from our perspective.
And if they admit that God can violate the laws of logic, that then
it undermines all of reason, and they can't make any argument ever. This is where their untrustworthiness comes from. And one of the things that keeps coming up in these, and I've talked about it before, is this hidden appeal to absolute certainty. And I'm happy saying I can't be absolutely certain about anything, including that, just for the people who are watching who are going to ask that question. But they think they can be absolutely certain. And they think they can be absolutely certain because they believe that there's a God who can make them absolutely certain. How do you demonstrate that even if there was a God who absolutely knew everything and could not be wrong, that this God could make you absolutely certain? As a falling, fallible being who has to rely on their senses just like everybody else, every objection they launch against the atheist worldview applies to them as well. And during the side debate, I talked about, if you've got a dirty filter, you can keep pouring clean water through it, but you have no confidence that the water you're getting out of there is clean. Or, you know, if you actually probably take a bucket of black paint, you can pour as much water as white paint as you want in there, and it's never going to be perfectly white because the black paint remains. And they don't seem to see, they just assume if God is absolutely certain, what they're really saying is, I'll just trust that God is certain, even though I'm not, and he can't make me certain.
Yeah, I think that same analogy could be given to a few of the white nationalists out there.
Did you watch that documentary on Leith?
I have it written down. I'm gonna check it out.
I wouldn't ordinarily give spoilers, but it's relevant in this particular side note, which we don't need to talk about too much. But he is a white supremacist, and he voluntarily submitted himself to a DNA test. And when
the guy who went on a talk show, the guy who went on a talk show and did it.
Yes,
I remember it happening in the news.
Yeah, it was a news story. It's in the documentary.
Sweet.
I think it's on Netflix. It's like Welcome to Leith, but he's like 13 or 14% sub-Saharan African, which is a lot. My wife had her DNA done by 23andMe. She's like the whitest person on the planet. She's like 99.5% white, you know, or European Caucasian. Yeah. And this dude's running around as a white supremacist, and he's way blacker than, you know, probably than I am.
Yeah. I think I'm like, I think I was almost 3% African or something in mine. I did the 23andMe too. I think I'm less than 3.
So let's keeping this on topic and trying to wrap this up for the atheist debate stuff. I'm glad you did this and, you know, opened a discussion, you know, and I could be wrong. There are other people to talk to about the foundations of logic and these other things. There are different views. There are different views within epistemology. There's the internalist and the externalist. And I'm probably going to talk to Ozzy and a few other people in future videos about that. What is your takeaway? Now, basically, I just sat here and you played a clip, and I pointed out where I think that you were just flat out wrong, or at least where our views disagree.
Sure.
But what is your overall perspective of this debate now, having done it before any other feedback, figuring out perhaps that there's one thing that where you were clearly talking past each other, not that you were necessarily wrong about what you were saying, but you were talking past each other. What's your takeaway from the whole debate?
I think just like with every debate I've ever done, with every show I've ever done, there's mistakes that I've made, of course. But I don't consider that a failure. I consider it a learning point. And more than anything, I feel like the success of the debate was the vast majority of the Christian listeners who are going to hear this are going to realize atheism isn't what they think it is. All of the things that Frank Turek says atheism is not true, and I demonstrated that effectively. So I think that, you know, it was sort of a shock to both Justin and Frank to hear me say, no, there are plenty of atheists who believe in immaterial things. There are plenty of atheists who believe in ghosts and the controlling of rainbows and all sorts of different things. That doesn't make them weird or wrong or crazy or anything. It points out that atheism doesn't necessarily encompass everything that Frank is attacking. And so I think the success of that was these listeners are going to walk away from this show going, okay, Frank is wrong about atheism, and maybe I've been wrong about atheism. Let me look it up. That's going to be a huge success if that happens. But the fact that I've made mistakes and can learn from them, that's another day. That's just another day in the life of David Smalley with a microphone. So
yeah, it's my day too. It's one of those things where the reason I do the debate reviews of the things is so that I can go back, because I know I make mistakes. I make mistakes that I don't catch. I make mistakes that I don't catch even when I review them. I make mistakes that other people might never see. But this diligent ability to care about trying to do the best you can is important. I like the fact that when you were talking about, you know, what atheism is and isn't, it's going to prompt people to think. And I agree with you. You can be an atheist. Hey, I don't believe in God, and believe in all kinds of bizarro things. And I think that those people are wrong and mistaken. You know, if they believe in things without evidence, that they're not.
You and I were at an atheist conference one time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy walking around, an atheist who bought a ticket, who was there to see speakers. He was walking around passing out information as a 9/11 truther and was saying that it was an inside job and all of these things. And he was even talking about the faked moon landing and all sorts of conspiracy theories. And he was ultimately asked to leave, I believe, because he was just sort of proselytizing this dogmatic message and passing out documents saying, you know, George Bush did 9/11 and all. And we were just like, dude, just back out of here. So for Christians to say atheism is and list all of these things as though we are a unified belief system, that's just not the case. But, you know, I am interested, and I'll have Frank on the show, and I'll answer these questions differently. I'll tell him I was wrong. I'll tell him I want to readdress this, because I want to know what happens when I turn that page. I want to know what happens when I say, okay, you know, I discussed it with Matt, and I believe I was misunderstanding your question. I was thinking about truth as an accurate thought about reality. However, truth can exist even if there is no mind to conceive that truth. So, okay, I'll bite. Yes, that statement is true. I want to know when I turn that page, what is he going to say? Am I acknowledging the existence of an immaterial idea? Okay, that's fine. What would you say to that question, Matt? If someone were to ask you some very vague question like, "Do you believe immaterial things can exist?" One of the things we talked about was a thought, and I said, you know, some people, and I even said this, some within atheist camps, we argue about this thing. Is a thought immaterial because you can't touch it? Or is a thought still happening within the matter of the brain, therefore rendering it still physical? And you just can't see it or touch it, but it is physical. And I was like, atheists argue about stuff like this all the time and don't always agree. But what is your stance on that? On immaterial world, things that are immaterial, specifically regarding cognition?
Well, normally I would acknowledge that I don't think these things exist as things or as entities. And it's because I when I use the word exist, I'm talking about something that has a fairly specific definition. And it's kind of like when they talk about a God who exists outside of space and time, that makes no sense, because existence is about time. If something exists for 0 seconds, that is identical to it not existing. And so when somebody says, does a thought exist? My answer is that in a colloquial sense, when we're just sitting around talking and using everyday language, yes, thoughts exist. But if we're going to get down and we're going to drill down to what things actually are, then I believe what we're describing is a brain state, which is a fact about reality that persists for some amount of time. And we are calling that brain state a thought in the same way, you know, like, does red exist? Well, as far as I can tell, red is entirely conceptual. There is some portion of the visible spectrum that we call red. We're not even completely sure, you know, hey, is pink red or is it part of red? You know, all these things. So does red exist? Does the rainbow exist? When really all we're talking about is sunlight reflecting off raindrops to create something that looks like a bow, but that bow doesn't exist. That's
is physical. Is that metaphysical? Is it immaterial? Do you believe in the immaterial?
Well, see, this is another thing about do you believe in, when I think the question isn't about believing in, but believing that.
Do you acknowledge that immaterial things exist?
No. Not in the specific sense. In the colloquial sense, when we point out at the sky and we say, hey, there's a rainbow, I'm saying that rainbow exists. But what I'm really saying is the sun is reflecting and refracting through raindrops that form this illusion, which we can see, but it is not, the rainbow itself is not an extant thing. It is a conglomeration of effects that produce this image that we then conceptualize. And to the extent, you know, if we're just sitting around, yeah, hey, rainbows exist. But in truth, when we drill down, when we're talking about the specifics of the material world, they don't exist.
Well, I mean, you could measure. I'm sure there are very powerful instruments that people can use, scientists can use, to measure the light refracting and how wide the light is and why we can see it from.
Well, you can just take a picture. I can take a picture of a rainbow.
Yeah.
And I can record it. But it depends. You have to define rainbow very specifically if you're going to talk about whether or not it exists in
what about cognition? What about thoughts? Are thoughts immaterial, or do you believe thoughts are physical manifestations?
A thought is the label that we put on brain states. My brain is having a concept, or is producing a concept, or recognizing, manufacturing a concept, but that concept doesn't exist as a thing. Okay. It is a brain state. I'm able to communicate this by a number of different linguistic things that produce what I hope is a similar brain state in you. That's how communication works. But does the thought exist is anything other than a brain state? You would need evidence for that, in the same way that all of the things that people want to label as a soul, you would need evidence for a soul, because what we find when we drill down is that everything people label a soul with is a product of the brain. Now, it may also be a product of an actual soul that's working through the brain, but they have to provide evidence for that extra bit. Until there's evidence for the extra bit, that the rainbow is a thing unto itself and not just light refracting through things, or that a thought is something unto itself, then I think it's a misuse of reason to say, does a thought exist? Because there's a context, colloquially, in which thoughts exist. I have thoughts. I manufacture thoughts. I experience thoughts, and they persist over some time, and I can communicate them. Do they exist as a thing unto themselves? That's like saying, does wetness exist? And wetness is how many water molecules do you have to have before you get something that could qualify as wet?
Look, Matt, I want to be clear. I could tell you were wrapping this up, and I do that with my shows. I'll start wrapping it up, and then someone will insert a topic of discussion that extends it by another 11 minutes. And I'm like, oh, it was so clean and clear and segmented, and we had this. So I didn't mean to do that to you, but this is what happens in these debates. They get you to sort of stop and think, wait a minute, is it immaterial? Because they want you to just put that one little pinky toe into something other than the physical world that we can see and touch and smell and hear. And then they go, aha. And they use that as a path to take your pinky toe and drag your whole leg into the immaterial world and metaphysicality and all these other things existing. So I'm always afraid I always sort of dance around that. So
I think I have a way to sum this up and give you something useful. If that appears to be what's going on, if they're starting to ask, do these non-physical things exist unto themselves? And they're trying to get you to dip your toe into the metaphysical waters. You can do that, and you can say, I'd be happy to concede that because people have God concepts, that the God in that concept exists in the same way a thought does. But I'm not willing to concede that there is a God that exists outside of space and time as an independent thinking agent who does anything or controls anything.
Okay, and now hold on. That's why I answered his question the way I did when he was saying, "Does the statement no human minds exist on Earth, is that statement true?" I was thinking, I can acknowledge the true statement, but without the human mind, the statement itself can't exist. The fact of reality can, but the statement can't be true if there's no minds to verify that it's true. And I was afraid of that, exactly what you just said happening. I keep saying afraid. It's not a fear. I was just avoiding that little weird trap in the debate because I didn't want to be dragged into it. So all I did was point out that I think it's a trap, and I think he's trying to get me to concede things I don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It's not necessarily a mistake. This is something you have to actually spend some time thinking about and become familiar with, and you have to be presented with it. The first time you're hit with it, you might do this. And here's the problem with being in the moment of the debates is that I don't worry about it, because there are people who are going to walk into a debate with a particular belief, and they're going to walk out with the same one no matter what's said. And there are other people who are going to change their mind, sometimes in the course of a single debate. I've had it happen. It's rare. But I'm going for the people in the middle ground who want to take this away as food for thought. And if I'm having a conversation with somebody and they ask me these questions, I can say, let me think about that and get back to you. And then I can go think about it and do some research. But in a debate on the radio or wherever under time constraints, if you do that, the fear is that people are going to perceive this as you have failed. You answered, I don't know. And this other guy is saying he does know. And he presented a question that you view as a trap. And so now you feel trapped, and now you're defensive, and now you've lost, and the theism is going to take over the world. I don't think any of that is real. It is a fiction that we invent in our heads. And I would like to see in debates, especially people doing early debates who are being presented with a thought problem that they've never investigated before, just say, I don't know what my answer is to that. Please tell me why yours is correct.
Ooh, I like that. And I have used before, my ignorance doesn't become your evidence.
Yeah.
Because I don't know doesn't make your God automatically correct. And what Frank was good about is he would just immediately go, no. I agree with you. I'm not saying that makes me right. I'm just saying it makes atheism flat wrong.
And he's actually wrong there. That's a fallacy.
Yeah.
Your inability to answer doesn't make atheism wrong. And the fact that atheism doesn't have an answer to something, or that there is no answer, like, for example, why does God kill babies? If strong atheism is true, then there is no God. And if there is no God, then there can be no answer to that question. And so it is the question itself that is the problem, because the question becomes circular. It is presuming there is a God and there must be an explanation for this, or it's assuming the inverse, that there is a situation for which there must be an explanation. But if the question is, why does God kill babies? Then you've begun by assuming God. And in many of the arguments, this is a hidden assumption that there is a God, or that there is an explanation. What reason do you have to think that there is an actual explanation, that this could be any other? I mean, how do you determine this couldn't be any other way, that this isn't just the way things are without the sort of explanation? So there's the assumption there is a God. There's the assumption there is an explanation. There's the assumption that there's an explanation of a particular type. And there's also the assumption that we are deserving in our current intellectual state and understanding of the universe to have an answer right frickin' now. And the fact that somebody can't offer you that right now makes people very comfortable accepting whatever answer their particular religion is offered, when there's been no demonstration of truth for what that religion offered.
Yep. I love it. This is why I talk to you, Matt. I love it.
And this is why I have people on to talk about things, you know, for the Atheist Debates Project. I think we covered a lot of ground today. I want to wrap this up so that, you know, because this is already going to be a long video. It's like an hour and some change for folks. But I want to thank David Smalley. Please go listen to Dogma Debate. He's moved out to LA and is making a go of things in, you know, godless liberal land while I'm still stuck in Texas.
Hey, Matt,
yeah.
I have an LA launch party March 25th at the Comedy Store, this historic comedy club in Hollywood called the Comedy Store. It's where all the big comics go. It's huge. We're actually doing our LA launch party there March 25th. So more details will be on dogmadebate.com. And in 3 days, I'll be doing, or actually by the time this video posts, I'll probably be doing it. I'll be in studio with Adam Carolla. I'm doing the Adam Carolla show in LA as well. So lots of cool things happening right now.
So basically you're saying people should come out and laugh at you.
Yes, they should. They should laugh at me.
All right. On that note, thanks to David. And the rest of the videos for this month are coming up. We're going to be talking about biblical contradictions and apologetics. And much appreciation to all of the people who support the Patreon project, the debates that I do, the talks that I do, and the guests that I have on to talk about their stuff. Hopefully you've benefited from this. If nothing else, recognizing that all of us are going to make mistakes, that there's something to learn, and that making a mistake isn't the end of the world, or that it doesn't somehow prove that there's a God. And that I might not be right either. So think on that for a while, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matt.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.